When light and darkness come together, they usually produce something unique. This time, they produce two new right lines for Keter Sanqtuary and Dark States. Stand up! Vanguard! Hey Cardfighters, welcome back to another Cardfight update, and today we once again arrive at Tuesday, which means it's the weekly Overdress news dump, and this time Bushiroad decided to release not one new main archetype for one of the main clans or nations, but two main archetypes and right lines for two different nations. And this time we got the right line reveals for Dark States and Keter Sanqtuary. And if you're scratching the back of your head questioning what are right lines, as I've been throwing out that word a couple of times in the first couple of minutes of this video, right lines are basically the definition of the main cards that will build up your right deck itself. And we've seen this in all the starter decks where there are specific units that you need to write on your Vanguard circle to get specific skills. And those are your grade 1, your grade 2, and then your main grade 3. And those dedicated units that you're going to play in your right deck is what is being referred to as a right line. Now, with that explanation out of the way, let's actually dive into these new right lines for Dark States and Keter Sanqtuary, as they reveal a very interesting new type of way to play that respective nation, and to some extent some support for the starter deck that we already got for those nations. And first, let's take a look at Dark States itself. And for Dark States, we begin with the grade 0 starter, which is Uncanny Burning. And this is just a typical starter that's exactly the same as the starters in the starter decks themselves, only a different artwork and a name. And the skill is, of course, although when this unit is rode upon, if you went second, draw a card. We know this, all the starters are going to have this, and probably this will be the way how starters are going to look in Overdress, very similar to that we had to draw starters with the shield ticket in the V series. It probably will stay the same in Overdress, but then with this type of effect. Now, if we go up to the grade 1, we see Deep Sonicer. And Deep Sonicer has the ability, although when this unit is placed on the Vanguard circle, soul charge 1. So once again, we have more soul generating, and this could actually also benefit Bruce to some extent, as Bruce needs enough soul to use its restand capabilities during the final rush turn. But this unit also has a secondary effect, which is continues on Vanguard circle. During your turn, if your soul has 10 or more cards, this unit gets power plus 10k. So this already tells us that this doesn't really work with Bruce, because Bruce wants to soul blast quite a significant amount of cards from the soul every single turn to use its main offensive capabilities. So this is more in line of a deck that just want to ramp up a lot of soul and then meet for specific requirements to then unleash powerful skills. If that does sound familiar to you, yes, this is basically Dark Irregulars in Dark States, which makes a lot of sense because Dark Irregulars is one of the clans that make up Dark States. So yeah, an 18k attacker or booster that also generates a soul when you just write it on the Vanguard circle is a decent generic support card for such a Dark Irregulars playstyle in Dark States. But if we go over to the next grade, that is the grade 2, we see Electro Spartan. And Electro Spartan has the ability, although when this unit is rode upon by Master of Gravity Barrow Magnus, cost, put a card from your hand into the soul, draw a card, and soul charge 1. So if we write a specific grade 3 on top of this, which always will happen with the right deck, we effectively generate 2 soul and we have a cycle. That's actually really good, because not only will we build up enough soul, we cycle one of those soul that we generate, so we can put specific cards in the soul if we have cards that maybe activate from soul, or we also want to reduce the chance of accidentally soul charging triggers, and definitely the over trigger is something you don't want to soul charge. So generating soul without actually relying on the top of the deck is actually pretty decent, while also increasing the consistency of your hand itself. So that already is a pretty good skill for the Dark Irregular aesthetic of Dark States. But then it also has a secondary effect, which is, although when this unit is placed on a Vanguard circle, cost counter plus 1 and soul charge 2. Now, this is actually pretty interesting because so far we haven't really seen a lot of counterblasting skills in Dark States. The only cards that use counterblast are the 2 Gear Chronicle-like cards from the starter deck that one uses counterblast to generate a lot of power and one uses counterblast to generate a little bit more shield. So if you want to rely on more soul charge options, then this card is actually not that bad, and for that matter could also be played in the Bruce deck as a main deck card because it's another card that generates 2 soul, which helps increase the contingency of your deck. Now, you aren't going to use it for its main ability, but if you're going to place it in your deck itself, then it already tells you you're only going to use it for its auto when this unit is placed on the Rigger Circle skill. So overall, a very interesting card, pretty flexible. It generates a lot of soul, which is gonna help the new deck that's gonna come out of this. That is, of course, the Barrow Magnus build. So with that said, let's go over Barrow Magnus and actually see what this deck has in store for us. So here we have the new main unit for Dark States from the main booster set, which is Master of Gravity Barrow Magnus. And Barrow Magnus has the ability Auto Vanguard Circle. When this unit attacks, cost Counterblast 1 and perform all of the following according to the number of cards in your soul. 5 or more, draw a card. 10 or more, this unit gets power plus 10k, critical plus 1 until the end of that battle. 15 or more, both you and your opponent put all of your own rearguards into your souls, choose up to 2 cards from your soul, call them to the Rigger Circle, and those units get power plus 10k until the end of turn. So this is effectively a Dark Regulars unit because it becomes more and more powerful the more soul you have. And for 1 counterblast, drawing a card is fine, but it's not good enough for the main boss unit itself. Now, if we have 10 or more soul, which is a lot more doable, then it becomes a 23k beater with double critical, and it draws you a card, which actually is not that bad if you think about it. And 10 soul is not that hard to generate, especially with the cards that we already have from the starter deck, because most cards themselves generate at least 1 soul, and some can even generate 2. And with the new ride line for Barrow Magnus and the new grade 2 Electro Spartan could potentially generating 2 to 4 soul, it is actually pretty doable to see 10 soul on your very first grade 3 turn if you are a bit lucky and high roll the deck itself. But then we get to the interesting part, and that's the 15 or more soul, because then it effectively allows you to attack 5 times, same as Bruce. But this is a little bit different because it allows you to then call out new units from your soul, so there's actually more utility options available to you, because if we have units with powerful unplace effects that don't restrict themselves that need to be placed from hand, you could potentially reactivate those effects and see some very interesting options. And giving those units an extra 10k power can also mean that you empower your next attacks. And don't forget, if you Persona road that turn, the passive 10k power buff to your front row also applies to the newly called unit, so they still acquire that buff as well. So this can be a very powerful skill if combined with the right units with potentially strong on-place effects. And at the same time, it removes your entire opponent's board, so it's somewhat also of a board wipe, but it could backfire against you if your opponent can use their soul for specific skills. So if you're up against Keter Sanqtuary and they have the dog that can soul blast 2 to gain power, doing this might not be in the best of interest to you. But interesting enough, if we go crazy scientist on this card, we can do some mad plays with this, because what we can do is write Bruce, then keep on him for a turn, then next turn we will enter Final Rush. We can then write Barrow Magnus from our hand on top of Bruce, so we are on this unit, but we are in Final Rush, and then we can call down 2 of the Time Fissuring Gear Hulks that basically gain a lot of power if you're in Final Rush, because they gain an extra 15k power, so they become 28k attackers. And then once we attack with the Vanguard, we can put them into the soul, and then once again call them out because they have an on-place effect. It reactivates that skill, and we can give them once again this extra 15k power, and they gain another 10k power off of this skill, so they become additionally 38k attackers. So we have actually pretty good beaters, while our Vanguard also comes in with an extra crit. Now, that combo play costs a total of 5 counterblast. It forces you to have 3 specific grade 3s in your hand, and it means your first grade 3 turn doesn't really do anything, and you also need to build up to 15 soul. So is it consistent? No. Is that play strong or good? Not really. But is it fun? Yes! But those are the cards that we got for Dark States. So let's go over to the other side and see what we got for Keter Sanqtuary. So for Keter Sanqtuary, we of course got a new starter, which is Connect Sorceress, which has the same skill. And you cannot deny that this is basically a new era of Lozenge Magus. It's effectively the same unit, but then newer? Like, I cannot unsee the resemblance here. But all jokes aside, let's go up one grade and see what the grade 1 has in store for us. Because there we see Tier Square Sorceress. And Tier Square Sorceress has the abilities, although when this unit is rode upon by Pentagleam Sorceress, cost counter +1 and draw a card. So counter +1 to draw a card, it's fine, it's what we would expect, especially in the early days of a new era, so it's completely fine. But then we also have, although Rearguard Circle, once a turn, when your drive check reveals a trigger unit, cost counter +1, choose one of your opponent's front row rearguards and put it on the bottom of their deck. So now we get once again in the Oracle Think Tank realm where we do something if we trigger units, and in this case we can spin an opponent's unit for the cost of a counterless, which is interesting because this is a Gear Chronicle rewrite effect but then given to an Oracle Think Tank unit. And overall, it's fine. It's not the most consistent, and then using a counterblast to spin a unit is probably not the best value you could get, because you probably get more value if you could outright retire it, because depending on what type of deck you're facing, they can just Superior Call the unit back to the field, and you just waste a counterblast for nothing. But against Dragon Empire, this skill is really annoying, because if you spin back a overdressed unit, you not spin back one card, but you spin back both cards. So both Trickster and Verena, or maybe the new Verena, will get sent back to the deck. And now the Dragon Empire player either needs to draw back into those cards, or he needs to call them from the drop zone or from the hand. Either way, need to waste more resources to once again get the Overdress state unit back onto the board. And getting it from the deck is way harder than getting it from the drop zone for them. So this is actually kind of annoying for them. So yeah, this is actually pretty interesting in specific matchups. But is the skill good? Not really, if I'm going to be very honest, but it's what we would expect from the first wave of support, and the right line effect itself is fine. Then we get to the grade 2, and this is where things start to actually get interesting, because the grade 2 is Pentagleam Sorceress, and Pentagleam Sorceress has the ability, although when this unit is rode upon by Hexaorb Sorceress, look at the 3 cards on top of your deck and put them on the top of your deck in any order. So once again, we got top deck manipulation, and this is something that I expected that Keter Sanqtuary would get somewhere down the line, because Oracle Think Tank and Genesis is in the mix. And in this case, checking top 3 is actually pretty good, and it actually increased the chance of hitting a trigger, thus allowing you to use the grade 1 if it's called the Rearguard Circle. But the main application to this card is actually the second effect, because we have although when this unit is placed on the Rearguard Circle, look at the top card of your deck and put it on the top or bottom of your deck. If you put it on the bottom of the deck, this unit gets power plus 2k until the end of turn. So this is actually top manipulation, because now we can also put non-usable cards to the bottom of the deck, which the right effect doesn't allow you to do. This is really good for the deck itself, because it once again increases the consistency of hitting and triggers, but it's also good for Bastion, because Bastion is a card or a deck that relies on drive check and grade 3s. This card can be used as a grade 2 tech option to increase the consistency of actually drive checking those grade 3s, because you can send non-grade 3s to the bottom of your deck and then increase the chance of actually hitting one, thus increasing the chance of actually re-standing one of your units. And this probably won't be the last of those cards. We probably will see more cards that allow us to manipulate the top of our deck. And once we see more grade 1s that can do that, which actually fit way better in Bastion, or maybe even grade 3s, then we might see some interesting things coming up for the starter deck for Keter Sanqtuary itself. So yeah, this could go very ugly very fast, especially since a lot of players are announcing that the Keter Sanqtuary starter deck might be the strongest of all 5, and we already see really good potential direct support for that deck. But with that said, let's take a look at the new main grade 3 for Keter Sanqtuary, which is Hexaorb Sorceress. And Hexaorb Sorceress has the abilities, although on Vanguard Circle, when your drive check reveals a trigger unit, choose one of your rearguards and it gets power plus 10k until the end of turn. So this basically turns your triggers in double the value. If you get a trigger, you give 10k power of its own effect, and then you get 10k power of this effect. Sadly, you cannot give it to the Vanguard, it must give it to the Rearguard. But if you boosted your Vanguard, you can give the extra 10k power to the booster, thus basically giving your Vanguard the extra 10k power in the process, because the entire column will be counted for the attack. So if the booster gets an additional power pump, so does the Vanguard itself, as it's being boosted by that specific unit. So still pretty pog. And it's not once per turn, so if you double check a trigger, you get 40k power onto the board, which is nothing to scoff at. But then we get to something very interesting, because we have another effect, which is Act on Vanguard Circle once a turn. If you Persona roll this turn, so once again a Persona roll effect, cost Counter Blast 1 and Soul Blast 1, reveal up to one critical trigger or front trigger from your hand and put it on the top of your deck. And this unit gets drive +1 until the end of turn. So not only are you increasing the potential of hitting triggers because you get one extra drive check, thus also increasing the overall pressure that you're putting out with your Vanguard, you can stack a critical or front trigger on the top of your deck if you have one in hand. This is basically a Tetramagus built into your boss unit. That's kind of ridiculous. Now, it being locked behind Persona Ride makes it not as consistent or as aggressive as it could be, but it combined with the first effect means you also get 20k power onto the board 100% of the time. Now, it could be even more if you check 2 triggers or 3 triggers, and if you check a front trigger, then it's not 20k, but potentially 40k if your entire front row is filled with units, which probably will be the case if you stack a front trigger. And it's interesting that they allow you to combine with the critical trigger as well as front trigger, because that means the deck is actually pretty flexible, because if your opponent is already at 5 damage the moment you're performing a Persona Ride, hitting a critical trigger might not be as beneficial to you or useful as much as a potential front trigger, which allows you to empower all your attacks, thus your opponent needs to waste even more attacks, because if your opponent is at 5 damage, you much rather want to go in a scenario where you can at least deal them the 6 damage, than potentially that there's a possibility that one of your attacks will go through and it could deal 2 damage, thus negating a potential heal or over trigger, but that's less likely as just breaking through their guard and just at least hit them with an attack. So being able to stack a critical trigger or front trigger opens up more design space and more flexibility in your playstyle while the match is happening, which is actually pretty interesting and pretty nice. And those are the main reveals that we've got today for Keter Sanqtuary as well as Dark States. Now, of course, these aren't all the reveals that we got, because we also got a bunch of promos for all the nations, and we got some V premium promos as well. But I want to save them for a next video that we're probably going to do tomorrow, as I want to go more in depth about those promos, because some promos bring something interesting to the table and other promos not so much, and I didn't want to make this video any longer than it already is, because this video is already going on long enough. The only final remark that I want to give in this video itself is that I'm kind of surprised that we didn't saw a keyword for Keter Sanqtuary, because of the 5 nations, we saw 3 nations with a keyword in the starter deck. And then the 4th nation, Stoicheia, got a keyword in the first reveals from the main booster. So the only nation that didn't got a keyword was Keter Sanqtuary, and I was pretty convinced that we would see that in the starter deck with the other archetype revealed. Now, with Hexaorb Sorceress or the Sorceress archetype revealed, we see no keyword in sight. So does that mean that Keter Sanqtuary won't get a keyword in the first set? Does that mean that Keter Sanqtuary won't get a keyword at all? Or does that mean that Keter Sanqtuary won't get a keyword in the first couple of support waves and maybe something later down the line? That's all just pure speculation. I have no clue what the future will bring. So we have just to wait and see. But the only thing that I do know what the future will bring is next week's reveals, because next week they're gonna reveal the secondary archetype for Dragon Empire and Brand Gate. And yes, we all know what that Brand Gate unit looks like. Is this going to be the second coming of the Antichrist in Vanguard, Chaos Breaker Dragon himself, or is this going to be something completely different? We don't know. We can all just imagine. But at the very least, we know that next week we know for sure if Overdress is doomed or it's actually gonna be magical. But that's all just speculation for now. Let me know in the comments down below what you guys think of these new cards that we got for Dark States as well as Keter Sanqtuary. Do you like this new playstyle more than the playstyle from the starter deck, or do you think the respective starter deck boss unit and archetype looks a bit more fun than what we've seen right now? I think it's gonna be 50-50 depending on your nation, as both sides of the coin for both Dark States and Keter Sanqtuary have something appealing to them. So I'm very curious of what you guys think, so let me know in the comments down below. As always, this video has been brought to you by our lovely patrons over patreon.com/VanguardInsider. You guys are amazing. If you want to support the channel or anything that's happening on the channel, you can simply go to patreon.com/VanguardInsider and become a patron today. But with that said, I'm Mr. Time Leap, and I see you guys in the next one.